Hey guys, what's going on? We have the last set of reveals before we get into that final dump of cards in the next couple of days. Let's get into it. First card is Flame Ward. This is the new mage secret. 3 mana. After a minion attacks your hero, deal 3 damage to all enemy minions. So very similar to Explosive Trap in Hunter, with a couple of key differences. The first one being that it doesn't do face damage. Second one being it's got 3 damage instead of 2. That one's pretty obvious. And the condition is slightly different in that Explosive Trap triggers before the minion actually does damage. This triggers afterwards. So sometimes you see a hunter setting your minions all to 2 health. Like, so you've got an 8/8 on board or something, and they deal 6 damage to it and expect the Explosive Trap to finish it off. Well, if you're trying to do that with Flame Ward, you're going to still take the 8 damage, which is obviously quite a big downside. On the plus side, they can't trigger the secret with like the Druid Hero Power or any weapons, which is going to make it a bit more efficient in killing minions in that regard. But I don't think that's a huge deal. I don't think this card is very good, really. The problem is, if they know this is Flame Ward, they can just not attack face and just wait until they win on board. Given that it's 3 damage to all minions, it's a bit harder to make a board that can survive the damage. Like, sometimes if you're against Explosive Trap, you can buff some of your minions beyond that 2 health, and then they still get to attack face that turn. But usually what happens is you'll know it's Explosive Trap, and then you just won't attack face, and you'll just take control of the board. And the tempo disadvantage that the hunter gets from spending 2 mana on a secret that doesn't interact for several turns is going to be enough that they fall behind in tempo. It's going to be a similar case of this. They're going to play this secret. You're probably going to have a good inclination that it's Flame Ward, or at least you'll try and play around it. And you're just not going to attack face until you've completely won the board. So much so that you can wait until you can repopulate the board immediately. So you just win them on board, try and grind them out of resources a little bit. Then you attack face and just reset the board when you've got a lot of mana to be able to, instantly create a new board. So given that's the way to play around this card, how does it benefit you as a mage if that's what your opponent's going to do? Well, it buys you a lot of time. If you're playing like a burn strategy, which is kind of maybe possible given that mage got this Cloud Prince card which deals 6 damage to face, along with like fireballs and cinder storms maybe. It could be a case that this deck just becomes a race sort of deck. Like, it just goes face, and you have to kill the mage before they kill you. And in which case, playing around Flame Ward by not attacking isn't really possible, because you need to start doing face damage to the mage. So you kind of force value out of this card if your deck is fast enough, because your opponent is forced to attack into it because they have to start doing face damage back to you, otherwise they're just going to lose every time. I'm not sure that's the case, but if this card is going to be good, I think that's probably one of the ways it will be, in that they just have to be forced to attack into it even though they know what it is. In terms of like synergy with the secret cards, I'm not sure this 2-drop's particularly very good. It kind of promotes a slower strategy with this Secrets of Mage, but the Mage secrets are really good for tempo. Like, if you go Kirin Tor Secret, it's a tempo tool, but this Arcane Flak Mage kind of promotes being behind on board and going for a mid-range sort of swing turn strategy, which isn't ideal for secrets, I don't think. And like I was just talking about with a Flame Ward, again, it's best if you're going for a burn style deck to play this card, which is also against Flak Mage. I mean, if you got Flame Ward up and they don't attack, you can maybe swing later on with the Flak Mage. I don't know. I just don't think this is very strong. I mean, you are going to see this card off Cyclone every now and then, and it's going to be pretty good. Like, it's an efficient AoE, and Conjurer's Mage kind of has inevitability on a lot of decks. Like, you have to kill the mage before they can do their broken stuff with Giants Conjuring. A lot of decks just aren't equipped to beat mage in the long run. So the Flame Ward is going to be pretty nice in that kind of deck when you're on a timer like that, because you're forced to play into it. You can't just sit there and kill everything that the mage does, because if you start building a board against them, they're going to go like Giant, Conjuring, Frost Nova, and you're just going to lose the game. So I'm not sure it'll be good enough to main deck in Conjurer's Mage. It's not terrible, to be honest, but you're definitely going to be pretty happy to see this a lot of the time when you get it off either Magic Trick or you get it off Cyclone. Next card, we have a pretty interesting legendary, Siamet, I think I'm going to call it that. It's a 7 mana 6/6. Battlecry, gain 2 of either Rush, Taunt, Divine Shield, or Wind Fury. Your choice. So I don't think this interacts with the Druid quest. But other than that, this seems like a very efficient minion. You can kind of think of Rush plus Divine Shield as this is a 6 mana 6/6, deal 6 to a minion, which compares kind of similarly to Crowd Roaster or Blaze Caller if you're hitting a minion with it, which seems quite good, or like Firelands Portal from the past. Obviously it can't hit face like some of those cards can do. In terms of board control, it's fairly similar. Other than that, if you want to remove 2 big things on the board, so they have 2 5/5s, you can use Rush and Wind Fury into one of the 5/5s and then trade into the other one, and that's pretty efficient removal. If you want to go defensive, Divine Shield and Taunt is fine if you're trying to, survive against Leroy or something. And then if you're against a warrior, you probably want to be going Divine Shield, Wind Fury as a threat. So it seems fairly flexible as a card. I think for the most part, you'll be wanting to use Rush Wind Fury or Rush Divine Shield. Unless you're being more proactive against a warrior. They're probably going to be the 2 choices you use most often. I mean, every other set, there seems to be a card like this, like Crowd Roaster, like Blaze Caller, where on paper it just looks really nutty, but in practice it's too slow, or the metagame is either too big, like Giants, which this does pretty poorly against, and too small. So it's like there's a big gap in the middle where this card would be effective, but there's no minions being played at that mana cost, or that stat distribution which this performs well against. We've got the big stuff like Giants, which is bad, and then we've got tokens and lackeys and things, which this also is kind of bad because the Divine Shield doesn't get much value if it's attacking into like 1/1s and 1/4s, etc. 7 mana is a lot of mana right now as well, given that you have to be very fast to get under Conjurer's Mage particularly, and then against Warrior you don't want to be getting towards turn 10 and playing minions like this, because big minions around turn 10 get absolutely farmed by Omega Devastator. So again, like I was talking, this is just not the right meta game for a card like this, like Crowd Roaster or something. Is just a terrible card right now, because every deck's either Giants or tokens, and they don't want to be getting towards the late game playing like mid-range minions like this because it gets farmed by Warrior. We might see a huge shift in the metagame in this expansion, or we might not, and that's going to really affect whether this card is good. A lot of people are touting like this is the new Ziliax, but I really don't think it is. I think this is more like a slightly better Crowd Roaster a lot of the time. It is a bit more flexible, that it can be a bit more efficient at removal, like faster at least, and you can use it defensively, but other than that I don't think it's that strong. Interesting though, it is elemental. there's a possibility that you use this in Cyclone Mage itself, because you can evocation this out for 5 mana, and giving it Rush Divine Shield, you can kill off your opponent's biggest thing, and if they don't deal with this, it's a fairly decent target to Conjurer's Calling, because maybe you get to value trade again, and then Conjurer's it, and that's pretty good. Oftentimes you like evocation out a Mountain Giant as well for similar mana costs. Probably not going to make the cut, but it's an application. If you're playing Quest Shaman, you can, for 9 mana, you can get every single keyword on this. I don't think it's really that much more beneficial to give it a Taunt and a Wind Fury on top of like Rush Divine Shield. You Rush Divine Shield into something. Yeah, the second Wind Fury is nice, so you get to value trade again, but then the Taunt is like, it's not that useful because this thing's going to be really damaged, and it's going to have Wind Fury, so they're going to be wanting to kill it off regardless. So having Taunt when it's like probably about a 6/3 at that point isn't really that beneficial. So like playing this for 9 mana for all the keywords is probably not that much better than just playing it for 2. It does affect your Shadow Walk if you're going for that. Giving yourself, I'm pretty sure the Shadow Walk will choose these randomly. So sometimes you'll get like Rush on the Shadow Walk, which helps you deal with board. A lot of times you don't want to give the Shadow Walk Taunt because you're probably playing something like Giggling Inventor. And the value of Giggling Inventor is that they have to go through your tiny minions before they can get to your big ones. If you're giving your Shadow Walk Taunt, they're just giving them easy access to kill off your most threatening minion, which is something you don't really want to do. So this might actually be just bad in Shadow Walk lists because it makes your Shadow Walk worse. Yeah, I'm a little hesitant on this card. I think it is perhaps being a bit overrated. A lot of the time it is just going to be very similar to like a Crowd Roaster or a Blaze Caller, both of which really underperformed to what they look like they would do on paper. And this meta game right now is really bad for those sort of cards where they're too expensive. They don't do well versus giants. They don't do well versus tokens, and they just get farmed by warriors. Next up we have Sarket's Sapper. This is a rogue 4-drop, 4 mana 4/4. Death Rattle, return a random enemy minion to your opponent's hand. So it's like a random sap, and it's a pirate. Fairly similar to Spider Bomb actually in Hunter in how they play around it. Spider Bomb is a pretty strong card, but it does have Magnetisation, which really helps it. You do have a very cheap way of activating it in Fireworks tech. Rogue doesn't quite have them. You can activate this with the Necrium Blade or the Necrium Vial. Turn 3 Blade into this. It's fairly similar to the 4 mana 2/4 mech Blight Nuzzle Crawler, I think it's called, which summons a 1/1 poisonous rush minion. It's kind of similar effect. I think this is probably weaker for the most part because you give them a minion back and you can't direct it. If they have a wide board, it's not often feasible to isolate a minion, so you might be rolling the dice a little bit. But to compensate for that, you get 4 attack. So this is like a better standalone minion in terms of board trades than Blight Nuzzle Crawler. So how good is this card? It really depends on the meta game, I think. If we're like in a mid-range minion meta game, like if there was Scalebanes around again, if there was like, 4/4s and stuff like that on board, this card would be pretty nice. Just being able to tempo kill like 5, like if we're against Death Rattle Hunter with all the eggs and stuff, this card would be really really sweet. But we're not in that meta game. We're against giants, and we're against warrior who play really reactive, and we're against lackeys. And this thing is terrible against lackeys. It's okay against Conjurer's Mage, I'd say. Fairly decent, but I don't think it's particularly better than Blight Nuzzle Crawler in that regard. And against warrior, I think it's pretty bad. If you played this on curve against a warrior, and they Militia Commander it, it is awful for you. Your thing dies, and you bounce back their Militia Commander, and the warrior has just got another Militia Commander in hand instead of a 2-1 on board, which I'm pretty sure they would prefer. So yeah, it is really bad against Militia Commander, which is a huge part of the metagame. If your 4-drop does bad against Militia Commander, you can't play it pretty much. With the set, we are seeing perhaps the resurgence of Death Rattle Rogue, and Blight Nozzle Crawler is one of the strongest cards in that deck. The curve of Necrian Blade on 3 into Blight Nozzle Crawler on 4 has always been very, very strong. And if you want to put this in your deck, it's somewhat similar to that curve, but it's like you're running 4 Blight Nozzle Crawlers, essentially, which is going to add a lot of consistency. Worth noting is a pirate, so you can potentially draw this from Raiding Party. Not sure that's something you really want to do, but it's definitely a possibility. You can also think about running this in a Hooktusk Rogue. Hooktusk Rogue right now has definitely weaker pirates than they would like, and this thing potentially gives a huge amount of tempo when you use it with Hooktusk. Kind of actually hard to kill this. Like, they have to have a really big board, actually. I mean, against giants, I think it's really good. If you do a Hooktusk turn against Conjurer's Mage, this thing coming out is pretty good, because you can kill off, like, you can damage one of the giants and then finish it off with this, and it will sap the other giant, which is really nice for you. But other than that, it's only an okay card. It really can backfire pretty hard, especially against lackeys. Like, if your opponent kills us off with like miscreants and things, you bounce the miscreant, you're gonna really be quite sad about it. If you bounce like the damage lackey, your opponent would probably rather have a damage lackey in hand than a 1-1 on board. Compared to Spider Bomb, the way you play around Spider Bomb is if they played it on board, you would first play as many wide minions as you can, and then value trade into it. And then the Spider Bomb Death Rattle would be pretty ineffective. It's going to be a similar way to this, although it is way harder to be able to value trade into this thing as a 4/4. It's mostly minions top out around 4/3s, 3/4s, 3/6s, etc., etc. It's hard to like have many things that can one hit this and live around this time in the game. So being able to go wide on board and value trade into this is kind of hard. You might have to trade 2 minions into this. You might have to trade 1-for-1 into this. But there are going to be ways where you can manipulate the board so that the sap is not very harmful to you, or potentially even beneficial to you. It's a decent amount of tempo on a 4/4 body. Plays pretty poorly into warrior, I'd say. Plays pretty poorly into lackeys for the most part. But it is a ton of tempo. We never know how the metagame is going to shift. And I think this card is okay on a metagame basis, and it really just depends what that metagame is. Next up we have King Ferris, I think. 10 mana 5/5. Battlecry. For each spell in your hand, summon a random minion of the same cost. So, instant thing we notice, 10 mana cost, 5/5, little nerf to Conjuring on a Sea Giant. So, yay for that, I guess. Other than that, powerful effect kind of reminds me of Dragon Caller Alana in Big Spell Mage. That was a 9 mana 5/5 that summoned a bunch of 5/5s for playing big spells during the game. The conditions are kind of reversed on this one, in that instead of having to have played a bunch of spells, you just have to have them in hand. Kind of, I don't know. If you're playing a really big, heavy spell deck, you're looking like a control deck, and really the big spells that we see right now. I mean, there's a few in Druid that have just been announced, but they're not huge spells. Priest might be a potential class that wants to run this. They are lacking a late game bomb for sure, and with Plague of Death, that's a nice thing to combo with this. Even if you don't use this just as an activator for the card, playing Plague of Death on turn 9 followed by a 10-drop bomb is pretty powerful 1-2 combo in terms of tempo. I reset the board and just drop out this big boy, and it's going to give you an instant sort of board to be able to contest your opponent or push your own sort of tempo. Other applications for this card, potentially in some sort of Galaxy Mage, if you can make this cost 1 mana and you have a bunch of spells from either like a Cyclone or who knows what else, other ways to generate spells in Mage, or Mage just runs a bunch of spells anyway. This is going to be able to generate quite a large board. For the times you don't get Galaxy, it's a bit sad because it's hard to get to 10 mana and being able to play this, because it's oftentimes this is not going to give you any taunts, it's not going to give you rushes, etc. You're likely just playing a bunch of stats onto the board, and when it comes to turn 10 in the game, that's not always a viable thing to do. Another way you could use this card, similar to how Hunter has used their spell power deck at the start of the last expansion, they were running like Malygos, their 7 mana spell damage weapon legendary, something Windrunner I think it's called, and Geppetto and Alexstrasza. You could kind of construct a similar sort of deck with this, because if you Geppetto this card, it's potentially really strong. Like maybe you could Geppetto it in Priest and run like loads of control stuff with it, and like you Geppetto the bad boy, you play it and you seance it back to your hand or something, and then you get to replay it again for 10 mana later on. Something like that is something maybe you want to be doing in that sort of deck. But other than that, I think in terms of how much board it makes for you, it's usually not going to be good enough unless you're running these specific cheaty style of decks. Like it's oftentimes just going to give you like 3 or 4 minions at most, and likely they're not going to have taunt or anything like that. Definitely a cool build around sort of card. Excited to see what kind of combos people come up with. They're the ones I was just thinking off the top of my head pretty much. But yeah, exciting legendary. These are what legendaries should be, really. For some reason the rest of the cards aren't on the Play Hearthstone page, so we're going to have to look at them like this. Nice little Russian one. Kartut Defender, 6 mana 3/4, Taunt, Reborn, and Death Rattle. Restore 3 health to your hero. So it's like a 3/4 that heals you for 3, summons a 3/1, and that also heals you for 3. And they both have, for 6 mana, this thing gets value traded into so hard. Killed by weapons and things really easy. It's just real bad tempo. It heals you for 6, which is, you know, fine. But for 5 mana, you could even just run Rotten Apple Bomb, which is 5 mana 4/5 taunt that heals you for 5, which is probably honestly similar or better stats than this card for 1 mana cheaper, which seems pretty huge. And that card really doesn't see much play at all, so I don't expect this one will either. Obviously there's synergies with quests, etc, etc. A few like cards printed which you can abuse this a little bit, but I just think the card overall is too weak to see much play. If you're running like a Plot Twist Warlock, maybe you want to consider this, because with Dolmos of Dorian, this thing coming out is pretty annoying to get through, and it heals you for a bunch, which is something you want from that deck. Next up, Priest 3/3, Wretched Reclaimer. Battlecry, destroy a friendly minion, then return it to life with full health. Alright, so this is like Reincarnate, a Shaman spell from ages ago, which had this text pretty much, but it wasn't just friendlies, you could do it on enemies as well. 3 mana 3/3, this thing curves really well with the Priest 2-drop. Grand Mummy. Oh, the card's up here now. I guess they've updated it. We can just talk about it from here then. Grand Mummy, Reborn, Death Rattle, give a random minion +1/+1. If you play this on turn 2, it's kind of sticky, to be honest. It's hard to kill it off in the early turns. You're likely going to have 1/2 of this left, and then you can just play this card onto it, and it will destroy this. This will give Wretched Reclaimer +1/+1, and then this will come back with the Reborn tag as well, I think. Even if this is just a 1/1 version, this has already died, and you've got the 1/1 version. I think this thing will bring it back with the reborn tag again. So that is a pretty cool interaction. It's a really quite a strong curve. Playing this guy into this guy, you get a 4/4 and a brand new Grand Mummy. So it's quite a nice curve. Other than that, you need kind of some other 2-drops with death rattles, etc. etc. The Lackey Generator, the 2/2, is pretty nice with Wretched Reclaimer as well. You get an extra Lackey in hand, which is quite a nice way to do it. With High Priest Amet, if you destroy something with Amet on board, it's going to come back with whatever health Amet has, which is potentially powerful. You can kind of abuse Psychopomp a bit if you're like killing the same thing with Recruiter. With this Wretched Reclaimer guy, it's more likely to come back with Psychopomp. Something you can do like that. It's really powerful on Reborn cards. Kind of reminds me of that Death Rattle Hunter 3-drop, which triggered a friendly Death Rattle for 3-mana 3/3. The name escapes me for now, but that thing was like, this kind of is the same thing. It kind of just activates a Death Rattle pretty much. Like if you have Mechanical Whelp and you play this, it's kind of the same thing. It's just activating its Death Rattle, which is pretty good. I mean, we're not in a meta game where we have as powerful Death Rattles as before. Like there's no cubes, there's no Devil's Sword eggs in the game, so like that kind of effect isn't as powerful. But we're getting a few decent reborn stuff, which is going to be pretty nice with this. But it's going to mean that killing priest minions is of top priority. And if you can't stick minions as priest, this thing's going to suck. There's no, like, the thing with Devil's Sword egg, it wasn't worth killing the egg, even though they run a bunch of things that activated it. They drop the egg and you have the ways to kill it. It just wasn't worth killing it because giving them the tempo of the 5/5 attacking straight away was just too bad for you. I don't think that's going to be the case with these reborn stuff. I think it's still going to be worth killing the reborn things. So this Wretched Reclaimer might be a bit worse because killing reborn stuff on curve is something you want to be doing, whereas with Devil's Sword egg, it was something that you shouldn't have really been doing. Also worth noting that this is quite nice with Injured Blade Master, which is probably a card you want to be running in this kind of deck with Psychopomp anyway, and with some other heal effects. So like playing Blade Master and this means it's going to come back as a 4/7, which is quite nice. And the final card we have is Wrapped Golem. This is a 7-mana 7/5. At the end of your turn, summon a 1/1 Scarab with Taunt, and it's also got Reborn. I think the original League of Explorers expansion had a very similar card to this in Warrior. I think it was in Warrior, Obsidian Destroyer, which was a 7-mana 7/7 with this card text other than the Reborn. I think it's probably slightly stronger. Obviously less health on the initial body, but having a Reborn effect makes it real awkward to be able to kill this because you're using like your small stuff to get through the 1/1 Scarab, your big stuff to kill the 7/5, and then you need another bit of small stuff to kill the 7/1, which is a lot of jumping through hoops to be able to kill this minion. In terms of playability, probably not good enough. We've power creeped quite a bit since League of Explorers, and the 7/7 back then wasn't good enough to play. So I imagine this also falls under the same sort of category. So yeah, that's all the cards I'm going to be talking about for now until the final dump. There's another card in like 10 hours or so, but I think I'll just talk about that one with the rest of the 40 so cards that we have to talk about then. We'll just blast through them all. And once the whole set is out, I'm going to be doing a full card reveal with like star ratings and stuff with ball control. I'm going to be streaming that one on Twitch, I think on the 1st at around 1 PM GMT. So tune into that either on my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Jambre, or on Ball Control's channel. Check my Twitter. I will give the time when we're doing it then. But if you can't tune in for that, I'm going to upload it onto this channel, the full thing anyway, so you can check it out in its unedited state there. But for now, thanks for watching. Come tune in for the full card reveal. If not, rewatch it on here. It'll be very good. A lot of insights there, and we'll have the full set to talk about. Bye!